Good morning. I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Yes, there's one change to the final agenda. Item 161, which is a consumer complaint, has been pulled and will not be considered today.
Thank you. First, I'd like to conduct a roll call of commissioners. When I call your name, please confirm that you are with us today. Commissioner Diane Berman.
Present.
Commissioner James Alisi. Commissioner Tracy Edwards.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner John Howard.
Here.
Commissioner Dave Valesky.
Here.
Commissioner John Majori.
Here.
Thank you. We'll go to the regular agenda. Our first item for discussion, item 101, case 23-G-0083, related to the examination of the installation of Permalock tapping T assemblies. It will be presented today by John Sipos. Dave Rossi, Dennis DeBari, and Michael Mole are available for questions. John, please begin.
Good morning and thank you. Following last month's order in the Brewster enforcement proceeding, which was number 22-G-0425, the draft order here today initiates a generic inquiry concerning the use and installation of Permalock tapping tees. During the Brewster investigation, DPS staff obtained information about, among other things, a National Transportation Safety Board notice about potential concerns related to the installation of those tapping tee components and their assemblies. The NTSB notice describes incidents involving the components that occurred in Pennsylvania and Tennessee. Department staff also reviewed information about incidents in Webster and Greece, in addition to the Brewster matter. The order here today initiates a new proceeding to provide a systemic and methodical means for companies to review, examine, and report on their use of the types of tees described in the NTSB notice. In addition, the draft order here directs three things. First, that the distribution utilities confirm that each of them have reviewed the NTSB notice. Second, that each of the utilities also confirm whether or not the utility currently uses the tapping tees involved in the NTSB notice. And third, if the utility does confirm that it uses the tees, to quantify how many tees are currently in use in the utility's distribution system. Thereafter, the department anticipates that it will evaluate each company's response in order to identify follow-up steps, and that the matter may return to the commission. This concludes our overview of the order, and I'd like to thank our colleagues up here, Michael Mole, Dennis DeBari, and David Rossi, for their dedication on this matter, and staff are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The safety of our energy systems is of paramount importance, and the Commission has a very essential and key role to ensure that public safety is taken seriously. And given the most recent events in Brewster, as you described, I view the actions outlined in this order as a prudent step to assess the scope and scale of potential issues with this device among regulated utilities in the state of New York. Once the department receives the required information, we can assess potential future actions at that time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with the chair. I think we can all agree that it's important to ensure the safe operation of the gas distribution system. I support this order. I support the inquiry. I think it sets up a holistic, methodical approach, and I look forward to follow up on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Alisi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree as well. My only concern would be is this is a significant issue, and my question would be why the utilities themselves haven't initiated the things that we're about to order on this, given what we know. So I'll be supportive of this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edwards?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. What are the types of incidents that have occurred?
As described in the NTSB report, there were incidents where there were leaks, and in responding to those leaks, there was property damage. There were also, in a limited number of cases, personal injuries as well, and those are outlined in the NTSB report. There was a fatality in the Pennsylvania case in Millersville, and I believe also in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly support this action. My one admonition will be haste. Haste is probably the wrong phrase. Thoroughness and expedition is very important. I believe that once the broader communities understand what is involved in here, that there will be great demand for a relatively quick answer. I understand that the solution may be longer-lived, but at least identifying the extent of the problem as quickly as possible is necessary. But I look forward to the next time you report on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John and your team, thank you for the work that you've done on this item and the item last session that we took up in regard to the specific circumstance of the Brewster incident. I'll certainly be supporting this. This is all about safety of the system, and that's certainly paramount. I do, Commissioner or Mr. Chairman, just want to take a brief moment, if I could, before we move on. We are only about 36, 48 hours removed from a nor'easter, and I just want to commend our Office of Emergency Management here, led by Kevin Wisely, and certainly the utility workers across the state who worked around the clock 24/7 to restore power to the some 100,000 or so utility customers who lost power during that event. So thank you for a job well done for everyone and anyone who played a role in getting us all through that recent storm. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
Thank you. I have no questions. I agree with the chair's assessment that this is a prudent action. And John, I want to thank you for keeping us apprised every step of the way. I think your presentation today and your prior commentary and updates have been very thorough. So thank you for a job well done, and thank you for your presentation. I'll be supporting this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll bring this to a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to initiate the examination of the Permalock tapping T assemblies as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Okay. The item is approved and the recommendations adopted. Thank you all. We'll now move to the second item for discussion. The second item for discussion today is item 102, case 19-G-0309, related to the Brooklyn Union Gas Company, doing business as National Grid New York, petition regarding the vaporizers 13 and 14 project. Presented today by Brandon Goodrich and Chris Stolicki. Jeff Hogan and Kevin Manns are also available for questions. Brandon, when you're ready, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. Item 102 regards a petition filed by National Grid seeking approval to recover the costs related to installing 2 additional vaporizers, known as Vaporizers 13 and 14, at its Greenpoint Energy Center in Brooklyn, New York. Staff recommends that the Commission deny the petition without prejudice at this time, based on the finding that Vaporizers 13 and 14 are not needed until at least 2 years after the time frame noted in the petition. National Grid filed this petition pursuant to the process for long-term capital capacity projects set forth in National Grid's currently effective rate plan, by which I mean the joint proposal adopted with modifications by the Commission in a rate order issued in cases 19G0309 and 19G0310 on August 12, 2021. I will provide an overview of the review process and public input received regarding the Vaporizers 13 and 14 project, and my colleague, Christopher Stalicki, will provide a more detailed description of the project, the analysis conducted by PA Consulting Incorporated, or PA, and staff's recommendations in the draft order before you. The rate plan identified certain long-term capital capacity projects, including Vaporizers 13 and 14 project, that were excluded from rate base, but made subject to an additional process to be initiated by a petition filed by National Grid. National Grid initiated that process with respect to Vaporizers 13 and 14 by filing its petition on August 29th, 2022. Per the process established in the rate plan, the vaporizer project was subject to opportunities for public input, as well as an engineering analysis conducted by a consultant independent of National Grid, in this instance, PA. The process established under the rate plan is to culminate in the Commission's consideration of whether the project is needed and whether to allow National Grid to recover the costs of the project through the Demand Capacity Surcharge Mechanism, or DCSM. The rate plan specifies that this determination is to be based on whether the project is required to meet design day demand demonstrated through a reasonable forecast of peak customer demand. In our presentation today, this means a forecast of customer demand on a day in which the average temperature in New York City is 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The rate plan also specifies consideration of other criteria, including, among other things, whether there are alternatives that could meet any forecasted need in the required timeframes for a lower all-in cost, and any safety and/or reliability benefits of the project. Per the rate plan, cost recovery may be denied if the Commission determines the project is not needed by the need date specified in the petition. Finally, the rate plan provides that if cost recovery for a project is denied, National Grid can propose the project again in a future rate or other proceeding based on changed circumstances or other sufficient bases. Once National Grid filed its petition in this case, the Secretary issued a notice inviting comment and announcing public hearings. The Department also published notice of the petition in the State Register. The Department held 4 public statement hearings, 2 virtual and 2 in-person, in the vicinity of the Greenpoint Energy Center. Approximately 60 oral comments were received. Additionally, approximately 1,500 written comments from the public have been received. Formal comments were also submitted by Earth Justice and Environmental Justice Clinic on behalf of Sane Energy Project and Alliance for a Green Economy, All Our Energy, New York Law School Legal Services Incorporated and the National Center for Law and Economic Justice, New York University School of Law's Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law. The commenters almost uniformly opposed the Vaporizer 13 and 14 project. Overall, commenters stated that the project is not needed, that the project is inconsistent with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act's greenhouse gas emissions targets, and that the project will add to the cumulative burden on the surrounding environmental justice and disadvantaged community. In addition to the comments opposing the vaporizers 13 and 14 project, several comments also expressed concerns with the wholly separate and unrelated earlier pipeline project of National Grid's, the Metropolitan Reliability Infrastructure, or MRI project, including that phases 1 through 4 of the MRI project were not tested prior to being placed in service. While not relevant to the vaporizers 13 and 14 project, the order before you states unequivocally that phases 1 through 4 of MRI were indeed tested as required by the Commission's regulations prior to being placed in service. Staff of the department's pipeline safety section certified that the pipeline passed the required strength tests, and the pipeline was constructed and is operating in a safe manner. I will now turn this presentation over to Chris Stalicki.
Thank you, Brandon. The project is related to the existing Greenpoint liquefied natural gas, or LNG plant. LNG is a non-pressurized cryogenic liquid stored in 2 existing tanks on the site, where it remains a liquid until gas is needed to support system demand, usually to help meet customer demand load in cold weather, but can also serve as an on-system supply source in emergency situations. The LNG stored in the existing tanks is created on-site generally during the summer months. The vaporizers are the equipment that warms the liquid into its gaseous state in preparation for injecting it into National Grid's existing gas system. There are currently 6 vaporizers at Greenpoint. 3 of the vaporizers are low pressure that inject natural gas into National Grid's 60 pounds per square inch gauge system. 3 are high pressure that inject gas into its 350 pound system. All 3 of the low pressure vaporizers can run at one time, while only 2 of the high pressure vaporizers can run with a spare unit available for backup or operations and maintenance. The project would add 2 additional low pressure vaporizers. Up to 4 of the low pressure vaporizers could run at the same time, leaving 1 for backup. The current supply capability of the LNG plant is approximately 291,000 decatherms per day, or about 10.4% of the design day demand for National Grid's downstate territory. Vaporizers 13 and 14 would increase the supply capacity to 350,000 decatherms per day, or about 12.5% of design day demand. Per the petition, the project would be constructed by the winter of 2024-25, so that it would be up and running under the proposed need date, which is the winter of 2026-27. Importantly, there would not be any additional storage capacity added to the facility. The project would simply allow National Grid to use the existing supply capacity at a more rapid rate. In the petition, National Grid projected the costs related to installing Vaporizer 13 and 14 project would be approximately $70 million. Through November of 2022, National Grid incurred $49.3 million. This includes approximately $10.5 million in design, engineering, and permitting costs, as well as the costs of the consultant's review. PA's primary analysis was to examine whether the project is needed to meet a reasonable forecast of design day demand. PA also conducted a review of National Grid's supply stack, since supply must meet demand to maintain reliability. In its report, PA found that National Grid's proposed supply stack did not include peaking supply contracts that will come up for renewal over the next few years. PA noted several of these contracts should be considered low risk due to their nature with cogeneration plants and the historical relationship National Grid has with the parties. PA also noted that National Grid excluded a compressed natural gas, or CNG, facility to be located in Farmingdale that is expected to come online for winter 2024-25. Finding no basis to exclude these supply resources, PA recommended adding them to the supply stack, which would extend the expected design day forecast need by winter to 2027-28. Next, PA reviewed National Grid's design day forecast. Notably, in the petition, National Grid acknowledged the design day forecast in 2022, which reflected a 5.2% decrease over the same forecast performed in 2021. However, rather than using the 2022 forecast, National Grid developed forecast scenarios that included economic and policy factors over the previous 3-year period. PA adjusted National Grid's forecast to incorporate the implications of the changing socioeconomic environment for the downstate natural gas market. PA's analysis took into account both a significant decrease of projected design day demand per National Grid's most recent 2022 forecast and what PA viewed as reasonable trends in the economy and the latest forecast from Moody's Analytics, further lowering the 2022 baseline another 1%. Based on both its adjustments to the forecast of design day demand and the supply stack, PA concluded that the project is not needed for the winter of 2026-27. Instead, PA found that absent any additional supplies coming online, vaporizers 13 and 14 would not be needed until the winter of 2028-29. As required by the rate order, PA also reviewed several criteria associated with the vaporizer project. With respect to reliability, PA noted that vaporizers 13 and 14 would provide a backup low-pressure unit, which can allow for maintenance and assist in unplanned vaporizer outages. PA also noted that there would not be any change to the footprint of the facility, interconnection, or LNG storage capacity. As for alternatives to the vaporizers, PA examined the Clove Lakes Uprate project, which would be a new pipeline across Staten Island, as well as existing programs related to demand response, electrification, and energy efficiency. PA concluded that the Clove Lakes pipeline is not a viable alternative in National Grid's existing demand-side management programs, while having the potential to decelerate demand, are not having a material impact on the demand in the short term. National Grid raised several arguments in response to the recommendations made in PA's report. For example, National Grid stated that PA should have considered that demand can change quickly. It further argued the vaporizer project should be reviewed against the design day demand forecast when the vaporizer was initially proposed, which was the winter of 2019-2020. Note, the joint proposal in the rate plan clearly stated the most recent demand forecast should be used in the analysis. Finally, National Grid stated that peaking contracts have availability concerns and cost risks, and CNG injection facilities may not be reliable depending upon the impact of a cold weather event on CNG tanker trucks being able to safely navigate city and Long Island roadways. The draft order before you would deny the petition without prejudice based on the finding, consistent with the recommendations made by PA, that the vaporizer 13 and 14 project is not needed to meet a reasonable forecast of peak demand in winter 2026-27. The draft order nevertheless recognizes that the project may or may not be needed after the winter of 2026-27 timeframe, depending on whether supply resources come online and National Grid's energy efficiency and demand response programs sufficiently mature. Thus, the draft order exhorts National Grid to redouble its efforts on energy efficiency and other demand-side management programs to further delay or entirely avoid the need for the project. It also recognizes that National Grid may decide to propose the project in a future rate filing or separate petition based on the need for the project to meet demand, notwithstanding National Grid's appropriate efforts to reduce demand through energy efficiency and other demand-side management efforts, or with sufficient justification of a reliability or safety need for the project. Finally, with regard to costs, the draft order would authorize National Grid to recover approximately $10.5 million in design, engineering, permitting, and consultant costs through the DCSM, and to continue to account for the remaining project costs as part of construction work in progress. The Commission would be able to address the remaining project costs and any associated cost recovery in a future proceeding once it is known whether or not the project would ultimately be constructed and placed in service. Thank you. This concludes our presentation today. We are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brandon and Chris, for your presentation today. I have a question for you regarding the forecast. So you said the forecast has changed. Can you amplify and clarify when you say changed? Do you mean our gas use has declined?
The expected gas demand has declined. The forecast for the expected gas demand has declined 5.2% according to National Grid between their forecast in 2021 and 2022.
Got it. But gas use is not actually projected to go down. Total gas use.
No, it is not.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's an important point.
I think the point to make is that there was a step change lower due to changes in the downstate market, primarily due to the pandemic. But going out from now through 29 and beyond, there is still growth in the gas demand.
Got it. So we're continuing to use more natural gas, just not at the rate originally projected in that earlier forecast.
It is both the rate, but we also start at a lower number because there was demand destruction from the pandemic.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that point. Okay, so thinking back to 2019, when the need for this project was first established, as you mentioned, the forecast at the time has since changed from then to today for a variety of reasons. But ultimately, we're still using more natural gas year over year, regardless of the change in the forecast. And for that reason, the need for this project, though not for the 26-27 year originally proposed, is now projected to be 2028, 2029. This need continues to grow at the pace forecasted. We may be looking at this project again in the future. In recognition of this fact, the draft order before us today discusses how best to manage where we are right now while examining what we may need to consider in the future. So what's up for discussion today is not whether to terminate or approve this project, but how the utility should be allowed to account for the expenditures of this project to date and how we may look at this project in the future. So thank you for your presentation. Looking forward to further discussions on this, as I'm sure we'll have. Commissioner Berman?
Thank you so much. I'm confused. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. It's not intended to be a gotcha. It's really intended to clarify for my own confusion. Today, we are denying without prejudice the petition, but leaving the door open for the company to come back. And we're denying it based on, if I'm hearing it, based on the forecast analysis the PA report did, which was, if I'm hearing from Mr. Stalicki, there is an understanding that that forecast is just a forecast. It doesn't mean that it is, capturing, it's capturing a moment in time, and that new forecast that was done within the realm of COVID and the decline at the time pursuant to COVID, but that we do see that gas demand will be stable and increase. Is that what I'm hearing? And again, I'm not looking to do a gotcha. I'm really just trying to understand the sort of delicacy of the forecast and what that means going forward.
Make sure I answer the question you're asking. The demand forecast shifted lower due to the pandemic, but there is still growth going forward.
Okay.
Based on the analysis of what PA determined to be a reasonable design day forecast, the project would not be needed for additional 2 years, plus it would allow more time for demand side management programs to mature over that time and possibly further delay the need for this project even further.
Okay.
Can I just add one more point, because I read the reports last night. The big issue that occurred in 2022 was the Ukraine war, and that was not considered in 2021 because it hadn't started yet. And so that was a big consideration in changing the slope moving forward, because last year, with supply chain issues and inflation, growth was projected to not be in line with what was projected in 2021.
And you're saying this for what rationale? I'm just trying to connect the dots here.
That's the basis for National Grid and PA's determination to kind of decrease the slope of the demand of the design day demand.
The forecast.
Correct.
Okay, which is what we're basing our potentially the decision on.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So with that, and thank you, both of you, for clarifying that, can you also share what the legal review for the commission is under this scenario?
Sure. So the commission has to look at the administrative record. Its decision must be based on the record. The order before you, which, would deny the permit with prejudice to refile, the commission must determine if that is reasonable based on the record, based on the standard of review, which was specified in the rate order that Mr. Goodrich just established for you, which is basically it needs to be based on what the design day is projected to be moving forward. And in addition, you have your really overriding obligation under Section 65(1) of the Public Service Law, which requires that the commission ensure that gas service is safe and adequate and at just and reasonable rates.
Okay, great, thank you. So I agree with your legal review standard. I do think that we should be looking whether the findings in the draft order are reasonable based on the review criteria specified in the rate order. And I also agree that within that, the commission has an obligation under Section 65(1) to maintain safe and adequate service at just and reasonable rates. And I understand that we're limiting our review to forecasting design day demand based on the joint proposal and the rate order. The disconnect I have is that when we are looking at the record and when we are looking at what is reasonable, and we have this layer of ensuring safe and reliable service, we can and should be looking at what exists in the matter record fully as part of the petition, and what's in the record and is otherwise available to the commission for review via administrative notice, via information that we have that is from the expertise of staff that informs their analysis when they are reviewing it. Here, we have chosen instead to take a snapshot, the PA report, as the justification to not approve the petition today, but we're not denying the petition. It's denying without prejudice. So this will likely come back to us in the future. And I do agree that design day is probably the right method to look at. The question for me that should be analyzed is, will the system hold at the design day temperature? If there's a hiccup on the interstate system on a design day, example, compression outages, what happens? I'm no expert, but I think that the recent history, especially looking at Christmas timeframe, 2022, shows that the system almost collapsed well above design day because there were multiple concerns on the transmission system. It is apparent to me we are not prudently allowing a cushion to be built into the system. Perhaps better stated, this is because of a lack of allowed reinforcement of the system that the cushion no longer exists. Now, if we granted the vaporizers, it allows the gas that goes into the low pressure system to be sent elsewhere on the system. It may not have solved this winter's issue, But it does allow an ability to move ever so slightly to be going elsewhere and diverted. So who's responsible going forward if there are outages, if we're supplanting the utilities' determined need for them for this system, for the vaporizers? Now, folks do from time to time try to blame the interstate pipes for compressor outages, and it's not a lack of supply, it's compressor outages. Okay. But the current supply is highly predicted on the system, interstate supply side, working as designed. We all should know that when needed most, that is not always the case. Compressors working full bore for extended periods of time is not what was intended when designed. Doing so can make them overheat, shut down, and they may get severely damaged by doing so. So it comes back to me, if we have knowledge of not having that cushion when we haven't even gotten to design day temperatures, we have a responsibility to not roll the dice in taking the chance on a design day temperature issue. We should understand that. Now, the thing I think I'm grappling with is that when we're relying on the review from the rate order, in that rate order, which was unanimous, while we required additional process and additional steps, we also identified that the Greenpoint LNG project was necessary as safe and reliable service. We did that in the rate case decision. So the question really isn't about, is it needed? The question is really when and what's the cost and what do we do? Now, the issues when I look at it from the PA consulting report is it has a lot of very nuanced parameters to give the results that it may not be needed, it's not needed in the time frame that the company suggested. But when you look at that report, I think it was about 98 pages, and I did read it several times, not just last night. There are a lot of what ifs, there are a lot of qualifiers, and it is not, as I think some have suggested, that they are saying it's not needed at all. They are just saying it's not perhaps under their forecast, again, which is a snapshot, and we understand that that forecast, based on the information we have, is perhaps now stale because it doesn't take into account the future and going forward. So I'm grappling with why we've chosen to only use the PA report as the be-all and end-all. Now, there was a response from National Grid to that PA report, and in that, a couple of things that the company highlighted. They focus on the fact that PA should consider that demand can change quickly, example, COVID and subsequent economic impacts. I think my understanding is that we recognize that that is a legitimate concern. Is that not true?
Yes, that's why the draft order before you recognizes that the company can come back if need be.
Right. So we recognize that. We say that we should track their efforts, and we should look to helping them further reduce demand and, ensure that we're watching it. We're willing to be on the edge of that risk. We're willing to be up there. At what point, what's the process for them to come back?
National Grid could either include it in a future rate proceeding or could file a separate petition seeking authorization for cost recovery as well.
So it's uncertain. They can do it in a future rate case, go through that process, which isn't going to be done in any time soon. They could file their own petition. They could file, frankly, tomorrow and come back. They could look to the gas planning proceeding. Or they could do nothing, and if things don't work, just institute more moratoriums. Is that what we're suggesting? So have we looked at, the PA report doesn't look at what does it look like? Or we've had past history where moratoriums have happened, it continues to exist, and we've then reacted to that negatively because of customer concern on the moratoriums. We know that demand can change quickly. What are the economic development potential opportunities in that utility's footprint that may not be able to happen if we don't have access to gas? Now, the company also argued that the forecast should be reviewed, the project should be reviewed against the forecast of demand available when the company initially proposed it. I look at it a little bit broader because our review is based on forecasting design demand based on the rate order. But it doesn't mean we just look to the PA report. We have to understand where that report and that analysis fits in. We have to look to the forecasting. There's been several different forecasts. We should be able to globally look at all of them and project out what we're already seeing is that gas demand is going to increase and recognize that. And so today, we should be clearer in exactly what we want when in the next steps. Not just we're going to watch you, not just that come if you want, hopefully you'll, do more demand response. And so for me, I want to see a little bit more specific certainty so that everyone, all stakeholders, whether they're supportive or not, understand that. Now, this record has a lot of process, has a lot of public statement hearings, has a lot of forums, has a lot of engagement. Are we going to expect that same amount, even if we see that there's an issue? Or are we going to say, based on the record that we already have, and based on the need and the risk that's there, we are not going to make them go through the same hoops? Because we've already, in the rate order, said that the project was necessary for safe and reliable service. We're not changing that. That should be clearer. That should be understood. We should actually be looking for certainty for the fact that they might need to ensure that they have capital for the project, that they need to ensure supply chain issues, that we're giving them certainty now that we understand that this, if there is a need, sooner than PA is saying, we're going to move quickly. So it's approved quickly. We should be sending a signal to DEC that today's decision is not a denial. It is a denial without prejudice, and in fact, we believe strongly that reliability is paramount. So DEC, which deferred their decision making till after we acted, understands specifically what we are saying. Now, the company also was concerned by PA putting back in other alternatives that were not in the forecasting from the company. Some of those alternatives the opponents don't want either. So we are also recognizing that we are supplanting some of that as well. The company also said in its response that PA failed to fully consider safety and reliability benefits. I think the company's right. I think that there are potential safety and reliability benefits. I think that that's why we came in the rate order and said that the project was necessary for safe and reliable service. And I think that we should have focused on that. Part of the difficulty is that PA was trying in a very nuanced way to fit into a very specific context and came out saying, well, it may not be necessary if all these other things are done in the time frame that the company says. They left out the pages that said what would happen if those things didn't come to fruition. What's the obligation? Are we willing to risk that? Plus, while the company says it can be done at the time that they submitted this in 18 months, once approved, there's a lot of steps that have to get done. We are probably behind the 8 ball, even if we need it at a later time frame. And so we see the challenges with going through some of those approval processes. We see the challenges, the waiting has already increased the costs from the supply chain side. It may be prudent of us to consider that. PA also didn't consider the costs of some of those alternatives, and also whether or not some of those alternatives would actually not be focused on reducing emissions if we're keeping people on oil instead, et cetera. I have thought long and hard about this. I respect where everyone is coming from, but I'm really concerned that this decision tries to delay in a way that actually isn't giving any certainty or comfort to anyone. And I think that is a problem. One of the things that I was struck also by was that PA focused on the public input, which I think is fair, except PA focused on that there was nearly unanimous negative feedback from residents and public officials, and the record has mostly opponents to this. That was the same in the rate order as well. The opponents have been consistent in their opposition. So for me, considering the record, that just doesn't make it for me like, so therefore we should delay. We've already spoken and addressed that issue. In the draft order, it says that one of the entities who's opposed referred to the company's initial filing as an effort to roll the dice and see what they can make stick under the guise of the nonsense, safe, and reliable banner that should already be opposed by the regulators. That is absolutely not correct, because we do not believe that our safe and reliable mandate is nonsense. We should be very firm and clear that safety and reliability is paramount. And we will not roll the dice and take that risk. I believe there's a strong need for fuel diversity as we focus on decarbonization. I believe we need multiple resources to play a role in our state's overall energy future as we seek to lower emissions. I do thank the staff team for your work on this order and on the 2019 rate case that this order stems from. I do believe it is a very hard place for staff to be in trying to thread the needle, and I believe you do an enormous amount in trying to do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize our safety and reliability. However, I think we need to have more leadership in letting you know that we are pushing you further on being more on the end of not risking safety and reliability. As is the case with every decision that comes before this commission, we must look at it through that lens of our mandate to ensure that consumers receive safe and reliable utility service at just and reasonable rates and with the least adverse effect upon the environment. This draft order tries to hit on every aspect of our mandate, and particularly on the issue of safe and reliable service. The project and the decision before us today is one of many hard decisions that are going to come with regards to gas infrastructure and the necessary investments we will have to make to continue to maintain safe and reliable service to the customers the utility serves. As you know, in 2021, I voted in favor of the rate case, which established this process for additional review of certain identified long-term capacity projects, including a review by the independent consultant PA to assess the need for each of these projects to meet a reasonable forecast of customers' peak demands and other considerations. Another separate decision recently came before the Commission in July of 2022 for the Southeast Suffolk project. Additional review process worked for the Southeast Suffolk project, and I voted to support it. In this project, PA Consulting hinged its assessment on the updated demand forecasts. They concluded in a very nuanced way, with a lot of caveats and a lot of what-ifs, that this changed forecast likely pushed out the need date for the project by several years. We should do more analysis based on what's already in the record, based on what we've said at session today on the understanding of the future need. So now we're presented with the PA assessment that the need for this project is now further out in the future. I don't understand the conclusion reached in the draft order. I don't understand why we are limiting it to the PA report. I believe we should look at this situation more holistically and consider the reliability benefits these projects can provide to serve as a contingency for other potential system reliability needs, not just peak demand. I also do recognize that several commenters have raised concerns about the project's compliance with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, including the risk of increasing emissions and disproportionately burdening disadvantaged communities. It is important to note that it was not long ago that the state and New York City climate policies advocated for rapid expansion of the gas system to reduce emissions associated with heating oil and propane use, and it worked. The transition of customers from those fuels to natural gas, resulting in significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and associated health and air quality benefits. That's not just my opinion, that's fact. These projects would seek to help improve the reliability of gas service to the same customers that commenters are noting the projects would negatively impact. We are now in the midst of a rapid transition to meet the requirements set forth in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. What I support is a reasonable and prudent focus and efforts to comply with it. We have to balance our statutory obligations, and we cannot roll the dice and risk safety and reliability. That is why I vote on the side of system reliability and the imperative to avoid widespread outages during winters and perhaps increase moratoriums. It is a prudent course of action from a reliability and environmental standpoint. We must err on the side of reliability here. We must continue to ensure the safety and reliability of the gas system as well as the electric system as we continue our efforts to deliver on state policy objectives. Sacrificing the reliability of one will jeopardize our ability to ensure the successful growth and expansion of the other. I cannot vote in favor of this denial of the petition without prejudice because it is doing nothing except delaying what we need to do, which is to approve the project without delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'd like to add to our guests, please keep commentary towards the end. We're getting some feedback that it's coming through pretty loudly, so thank you.
Let me just address very quickly, just to clarify the record. The draft order before you is an independent analysis of staff. It does obviously consider PA's report, but it's ultimately an independent analysis of staff and your own independent analysis.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Chairman. Chris, could you just very quickly touch on your comments on design cost recovery as part of this? Were there any elements in there, any considerations for design cost recovery on this project?
Yes. The language in the rate plan allowed for National Grid to recover approximately $10.5 million that covers the design, engineering, permitting, and consultant costs.
There is an element there. This is for the record. That's why I'm asking. So there is an element in there for cost recovery.
For those items I just mentioned, yes.
For those items, okay. Thank you. Yes. So based on that, based on the fact that the report cites no immediate need, and the fact that it doesn't preclude them from coming back and pursuing this at another time in the future, I'm going to support the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edwards.
So, I look at this a little bit different. We have huge projects ahead of us with the CLCPA. And we have to depend on everyone to have integrity, to be forthright, to give us their best advice and counsel, and to be good partners. And what my concern is that why did National Grid not use all of the information that PA provided to us? Why is that? So we have opponents, correct, that provided information to us that said we don't need it at all. And it's our job to try to balance to see what is it that we need to do now for safe and reliable service while we turn this big ship towards CLCPA. So my concern is a couple things. In here, it says that National Grid proposed supply stack did not include peaking supply contracts that will come up for renewal over the next few years. Why? It also says that National Grid excluded a compressed natural gas facility to be located in Farmingdale that is expected to become online in 2024, 2025. Why? It also, which was just talked about, did not include the most recent forecast. Why? So we can't, we have to be able to make decisions based on every organization, company, utility, consultant giving us the best information that they have. And my concern is, why did we need to have an independent consultant with our staff find all of these things that were not included? Why didn't National Grid provide and include all of this information? Because if they did, then it looks to me that it supports the fact that we didn't need this now. We didn't need it when they said we were going to need it. If they used all this information, is it accurate that the data would have supported that while we may have needed it in the future, we would not need it when they said that we were going to need it? Is that accurate? If they had included all of this information, then it looks to me that although we would need it sometime in the future, we would not need it now. And it is possible that if we do all of the energy efficiency and if we do everything that we can, possibly we wouldn't need it at all. I guess I'm struggling with why didn't they use all of this information? Did they provide any rationale to you? I mean, I see their response. I read the response. I get it. But was there a conversation between the two, PA Consulting and our staff and National Grid, on why didn't they use all of those things? Why did they omit information? Why didn't they use the most recent forecast? Did they provide any rationale for that at all?
I think the rationale they provided wasn't in their response. in their response to the PA report that's part of the record.
Right. What do you mean? They didn't, what do you mean?
They explained, National Grid explained its position in its response to the PA report that it filed in the record in this proceedings.
Yeah, but they're not, but what I'm saying is they provided, the response that they gave was that things change rapidly. I get that part of it. But what I'm asking you is PA Consulting provided our team specific things that National Grid did not include in their analysis. And I guess my question is, when it was pointed out to National Grid that they did not include these 3 items, what was their response to that?
We didn't have any separate conversations, like where
Okay.
it was seeking their private motives.
Okay. Well, that's where I am. I'm very concerned that, we can't have disingenuous. This is too important. These things are critical. We're spending so much money. We are trying to balance making sure that we are keeping things moving and keeping everyone safe and making sure that we do have reliable service. However, we absolutely have to make sure that we are turning this ship, that we are making sure that we are laser focused on our CLCPA goals. And then when we have National Grid provide information to us that says we need to do this, and we agree that we need to do it, but then we find out independently that they didn't use all of the information to justify it. It really is a problem for me, because we, again, have to make sure that we have integrity, that we are trusting our partners, that we are using accurate and up-to-date data in order to make sure that the decisions that we are making are timely. And if we have, if it's found out by an independent consultant, not by National Grid, that they excluded a facility, that they did not use the most recent forecasts, it's a problem. So I absolutely am going to vote to deny this. I absolutely I'm going to vote. But my concern is are they going to then put in another petition tomorrow and come up with another rationale to get this done? I really think that we and they have an obligation to work with us to say, you know what, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we don't need it. Maybe, what are the things that we need to do so that we can trust the information that they are providing? We have to be able to have trust and integrity. And my concern is, if it were not for our staff And if it were not for an independent consultant, we would be making a decision, providing the cost recovery based on incomplete or flawed information. And I really do not think that that is acceptable. So, I mean, I'm voting in favor. It's not that I'm voting in favor to deny. Absolutely. But my concern is, what is it that needs to be done so that we have more trust and more integrity to make sure that we have and are using the most reliable and accurate information that we can as we make these decisions on a going forward basis? Because it is really upsetting because we have too many things that all of us collectively are trying to manage, and we have to make sure that we are bringing people along the way. And if this continues to happen, where we are not using accurate data, where we are using flawed data, that we have to have independent consultants to find out that people are not providing this information, it is hard to then address those that are in opposition, that are saying we didn't even need it in the first place. It's hard to have that dialogue for them to trust us that we are going to be making the right decisions. We have to be able to trust each other. And right now, I do not trust. So thank you to our team and thank you to PA Consultants.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. General Counsel, Bob?
Let me just clarify one point. So in the original filing made by National Grid, they do acknowledge and point to the 2022 design day forecast. It is in their initial filing. It's just that they considered forecasts from earlier years. That's where the disagreement was. So it's not that they ignored it.
Why?
Or they had reasons in their report that, let's just say, we disagreed with and that we found to be unreasonable. And all of those reasons are specified in the draft order before you.
Yeah, I just, okay.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. I want to dig into your question a little bit and ask a follow-up to the forecast. So, Chris and Brandon, how many forecasts have been developed since the 2019 proposal of this project?
National Grid updates their forecast around the June timeframe each year. So that would be 2020, 2021, 2022.
Right. And in the updates of these forecasts, all the factors that were considered that were under discussion, they're usually part and included in the respective forecasts. So that would include the peaking supply forecasts and the other item that was mentioned, correct?
That is correct. I just want to be clear that we're talking about demand forecasts, but we're also talking about the supply stack, which is where some of those supply sources that Commissioner Edwards was referring to were excluded.
Right.
This is where we have to marry existing supply versus demand to maintain reliability.
Right. And there are a lot of factors that affect both that may increase the likelihood or viability of one in one particular forecast, diminish it in another. Is that a correct assumption?
Correct.
Okay, right. And I don't remember the specific rationale that National Grid used for excluding them, but ultimately there was a difference of opinion in terms of whether they should be or should not be included in the forecast that PA Consulting ultimately used. Is that a safe assessment to say?
Just to clarify, by that, do you mean excluding the peaking contracts from the supply?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. And I yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on now to Commissioner Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My relationship with PA Consultant sort of parallels when I got here. The PA was contracted by the agency at the time to deal with the issue of the moratorium. And as I recall, in 2019, the public outcry was, in fact, new customers being denied gas service by National Grid in certain locales. And to respond to that, we had PA come in and do an extensive report on how we could avoid future moratoria, which included a variety of factors, increased DSM and the vaporizers, and then some CNG projects, and potentially large supply contract initiatives that clearly were never going to happen. So that's where I've started with them. And at the time, there was not general consensus. Certainly, I didn't feel from staff that we felt what PA had produced at that time was something we could rely 100% on. Nor could we rely, as we turned out by several orders, rely on what the company said. So it did come to staff and their interpretation of these sometimes conflicting opinions to come up with a reasonable middle ground. And I believe we're back to that now. One of the things that concerns me, this issue of the demand side alternatives, which we've been talking about certainly from 2019 into 2020 as being potentially the best method to alleviate gas demand in the KEDNY service territory. So in our analysis, do we believe that the company and or any other demand side programs that are not actually administered by the company but maybe administered by the state of New York are wanting? Have they not been sufficient and have not provided the amount of gas demand reduction that we anticipate or believe is possible?
So I can try to answer that for you. So as far as demand side management, I would say there's kind of three parts to that. There's electrification efforts, there's demand response efforts, and then there's the energy efficiency efforts, which to help reduce that peak demand would be more focused on weatherization. General assessment of those programs in recent years and KEDNY and KEDLI's efforts on their end. I would say on the electrification side, we've seen a lot of electrification in the KEDNY service territory. KEDNY is not responsible for that program. That is a program that's run by the electric utilities under New York Clean Heat. So that would be in the Con Ed service territory. So KEDNY works with Con Ed and provides referrals, and Con Ed would serve those customers.
So is it safe to say that Con Ed has performed adequately in terms of their move customers to electric heat and hot water?
Yes, in that service territory specifically, they've far exceeded any of the actual projections that we had for electrification in the KEDNY service territory.
And those programs are rate-based in people's electric bills, correct?
That's correct.
Now, can you describe what programs are rate-based on the KEDNY side?
Yes, so they have the demand response program, which I believe has been relatively successful over the last couple of years and has been provided for in their DSM plans that were actually recently approved by the commission in January. On the weatherization side, I would say those efforts have not materialized as had been planned or expected. It's been a slow start, I'd say, and we're hoping that those can pick up in future years, and we have been told that the last half of 22, they have accelerated the work there. We're waiting on reports of the year end for weatherization, but I would say in general, weatherization has been struggling and behind schedule.
And both of those programs, or all three of those programs, do, again, as owner ready, put upward pressure on costs to ratepayers, correct?
That's correct.
And would it be our...
I'm sorry. Generally, the cost of those would put upward pressure on rates, but those who participate would see.
No, I got it.
Okay. Just wanted
If
to
you
be
participate, you get a deal, but if you don't, you still pay. And
Correct.
even if you do, you still pay.
correct.
You know, getting back to my ongoing and almost monotonous thing that these are programs that we shouldn't pay through rates. If we need to electrify our buildings, if we need to certainly bring them up to higher energy efficiency standards, there's got to be better ways to pay for it than customers' bills. Because part of this whole other underlying argument against the vaporizers writ large has been that they do provide, that it costs ratepayers money. That when there is strong opinion that it costs ratepayers money unnecessarily. The other, want to delve into the demand response program, which we lived through Christmas time this year. Part of that demand response is fuel switching, correct?
Yes, for some customers, that would be what they would use for.
And these are not little customers, are they?
No, they're not.
So when they switch from natural gas service to fuel oil, for instance, one could safely say that has a negative environmental impact as opposed to using natural gas, correct?
Yes, in those instances where they would switch to oil, that is the case, yes.
Great. And as Commissioner Berman pointed out, these shortages can happen outside of the state of New York and way beyond our control, as we actually did see potentially last Christmas dealing with interstate pipeline constraint and lack of capacity, right?
Yes.
So a lot of things can happen. So the other issue becomes, and this goes back to the 2019, our relationships with PA. And what I've learned just generally since then, when we say forecasting, what we're really saying is an informed guess, correct? Could be higher, could be lower, could be off by a little. We hope not by a lot. Is that safe to say?
Yes, that's why it's updated every year.
And would you say the last few years have been an unprecedented period of certainty on any level, whether it's supply, demand, or wholesale price that drive our retail price? Is that safe to say? This is uncharted waters. So when we make an analysis of what has happened most recently, we aren't served by decades worth of history and analysis. Is that safe to say?
Yes.
So what we're being asked to do here, and from the company, is how much insurance do we buy for a safe and reliable system? And when do we buy the insurance? If we had a plan that I could point to that says, this is how we're going to decarbonize the KEDNY system by this date, and then another one several years down, and another a decade. But that plan doesn't exist. That plan doesn't exist. And in terms of our CLCPA goals and mandates, that's what they are, goals and mandates. They have not produced the plan. So the issue here to me is as much about how we plan for the future as opposed to reacting to single instances. And while these vaporizers could provide, and I believe, Chris, you outlined this to me personally, that they provide a reasonable cushion. It's not an enormous cushion in terms of if we had, as we now know, that climate change not only can make the earth very warm certain periods of the year, it can make the earth very cold. So, in other words, we don't really know. I mean, we try to know and provide enough insurance to make sure that we cover our bases. But again, it's an informed judgment, right? But it's a judgment nonetheless.
Correct.
And we are doing that judgment absent a long-term plan. Is that also correct?
I would say that's not entirely correct.
I mean, long-term meaning decade, 2 decades.
Right, and just people have mentioned it, but the commission did issue an order authorizing moratorium, and the companies have to keep ongoing with their demand forecast, which they're doing. And if they do hit a point where supply and demand are out of balance, they will file with us a request for moratorium. That is an option that they have.
Well, we do know what happened the last time that happened. It didn't go particularly well.
Con Ed has an existing moratorium right now, and that they've had since, I believe,
Right, but not
2019.
system-wide.
In southern Westchester County.
Right, correct. So, in any event, I will be supporting this, but again, with great trepidation. And it is my hope, and it is a hope, I don't believe it, that we will have, at some point in the near future, not just for this company, but for all gas LDCs and the electric LDCs, their partners, a real roadmap on what we need to do on what dates to meet what goals and or mandates. And along with that, how much is going to cost? Because getting there will not be free. But again, I do believe that this order, it appears to buy us some time, but it doesn't forestall something that may be needed in the near term. And next winter could be horrible. We don't know. That our Christmas incident could have lasted a week or more, which would have changed the paradigm dramatically. So again, I will be supporting this order, but with some great trepidation, and very hopeful that quote the state of New York gets it together and actually has a plan that's implementable, budgeted, and in a time quick enough to make a difference. Because if not, we're going to be doing these cases one at a time. And I don't think that will satisfy what ratepayers want, and I certainly don't believe it will satisfy what we believe our climate goals will be. But again, you got to make the judgment on what's before you. And at this point, I will trust staff's analysis that we have some time. And we will see, and I would hope that we would be able to report much quicker in terms of a periodic report. Are we getting there? Because the lag between, the forecast, is a yearly forecast adequate? And when they vary by 5%, that's a big variance, unprecedented. So again, we might see next year's report, and it may come up with a dramatically different conclusion. So again, I thank everybody for their hard work. I wish we had multiple consultants beyond PA, not to knock them per se, but when we go back to the same well, new perspectives is always good. And again, but thank you. This was a tough call. This is a tough call. And again, future commissions undoubtedly going to have to deal with it. It's just a question, it's going to be in 8 to 12 months or 20 some months, but it's not going away. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valesky,
Chair, may I respond to something briefly?
go right ahead.
Commissioner Howard, you noted a desire for more long-term planning, and I just wanted to note a couple of venues where that is happening and coming up. Is we have the long-term plans that the utilities are filing in a staggered fashion in the gas planning case. Coming out of the gas planning case, they're going to be given their own cases. NFG has filed one of those, and we do have a different consultant, CRA, Charles River Associates, assisting staff in reviewing that plan. And there is also statewide utilities will be doing a pathways study that is, I believe they're working on the proposal for that, and that's to be filed, I believe, at the end of March.
Thank you for that clarification.
Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Brandon, Chris, and your entire team for the work that you've put in on this item. So I think over and over, safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. Ever since the day of my Senate confirmation, right? Safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates, and the draft orders that come before us since then, I'm constantly looking at those orders through that lens. That's the mission of the commission, and I think to one extent we all do. In regard to this order, I do believe that staff has satisfactorily met those requirements to be consistent with our mission of providing safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates, and as a result, I'll be supporting this item that denies at this time the gas vaporizers. I do, however, want to just take an extra moment to share some of my thought process of how I got to that conclusion. It's easy to take a look at draft orders and flip to the back 2 pages, because really what matters is what is the commission doing, what is the commission not doing, and that is always summarized in the last couple of pages. But I think unless we take the time to read through the entire petition, and I don't just mean we, I'm hoping everyone who is interested in issues that come before us actually take the time to read through the entire draft orders that come before us, and as they're reported upon going forward to the public, because there's a lot of information in there that when we support items, we support its findings, but I like to think we also support the path by which you all got us to those findings. So in that regard, the discussion section of draft orders, for me, contains a lot of really helpful information that shows me the thought process that led all of you to come to your particular conclusion. I just wanted to lift, if I could, even though the entire draft order will be in the record, I would just like to lift a paragraph from that discussion section and read it into the record, because this, for me, is important, and what I am looking at as I look not only at this order, but certainly orders to come. And this is page 17 in the draft itself. It follows the first paragraph in the discussion section about design day conditions. And it says this: the Commission is mindful of and has taken numerous actions to support New York State's transition from dependency on fossil fuels, including natural gas, to reliance on clean energy. This transition will take time, and we must continue to ensure that customers who presently rely on natural gas and who are entitled by statute to seek gas service can continue to receive safe, adequate, and reliable service, particularly on the coldest days of the year. Accordingly, while the transition to a net zero economy proceeds in New York, some continued investments in natural gas infrastructure remain necessary. I think that's an important paragraph. I appreciate its inclusion in the draft order, and I'll be supporting the order again. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Majori?
Thank you. I would like to explain how I also arrived at the decision to vote yes on the order before us. I was going to state this, but let me ask this as a question. I'm doing what Commissioner Valesky said, and I'm going to the back of the order and looking at the conclusion, and the first sentence of the conclusion begins, "The petition is denied." So if I vote yes, am I voting to deny the petition?
That is correct.
You're voting to
Okay.
deny the
If-
petition without prejudice to refile based on the conditions otherwise stated in the order.
I got that, and I'm going to comment on that as well. But thank you. But let me ask this question.
Let me just
If,
add one
if we,
important point.
not just me, but if the, I'm sorry?
Let me just raise one more important point because I have it in front of me
Yeah.
too. It's to the extent of approving the limited cost recovery. So there is a cost recovery component in this, as Commissioner Alessi talked about earlier.
Got it. Yes, I see that. And yes, I acknowledge that. If this commission voted down the order, would that be tantamount to approving the petition, or would you have to come back with another order?
Can you restate the question?
Yeah, if instead of voting yes, if this commission did not approve the order, if we rejected the order in this session right now, would the act of rejecting the order be an act of approval of the petition? Would we be approving the petition by rejecting the order?
No, it wouldn't be, but I should just add, I mean, this is the order, it's a draft
Yeah.
order. If you wanted to vote in favor of the petition, that would be an option for you.
Right. No, that's my understanding. So thank you. And the reason I'm asking that is because I just want to be really clear. The decisive act of voting yes is a denial of the petition. That's the option that I have. It's not I could vote to deny the petition, or I could also vote to approve the petition. I could vote yes, and that's a denial of the petition. And Bob, you explained the caveat, which is that there is some cost recovery, as Commissioner Alessi explained, and that the denial is without prejudice, which is explained in the language. But I'm going to look at some of the other language in the order, because in voting yes, I'm voting in favor of the language that's in the order. I also want to say this. Although the order is very clear that we're denying without prejudice, first of all, if something comes before us in the future, anything I'm saying today is not to be misconstrued as prejudging something that comes before us in the future. I would look at something new with wide open eyes. That said, I am hoping not to see this question revisited before this commission in a session like this anytime soon. So the order, I'm going to quote as much as I can. I mean, as much as possible. I want to rely on quotes. On page 2, it says the project may be needed by winter of 2028-29. And I think it was Chris who said in the presentation, it may or may not be needed, which is, I think the or not is, implied in the word may. And also on page 11, it said construction would need to begin by May of 2027 to meet the need date. So if it turns out that may is actually, it will be needed, the order says construction would need to begin by May of 2027. So I don't think that the commission as a body would need to act too much earlier than that in order to begin construction in alignment with that assessment. But there's a lot more in this order than that. I think that the order acknowledges that a lot can happen between now and then. And I also think that the order is very, very clear about what this commission's expectations are of KEDNY and about what should happen next. And I just want to point out a couple of things that are in here. So on page 19, well, let me start on page 2. This is the beginning of the order. The commission finds that KEDNY must redouble its efforts on energy efficiency and other demand-side management programs to further delay or entirely avoid the need for this project. page 2. Page 19. Page 19 discusses how it discusses the design day forecast. And it says the commission's mindful that forecasts can change, as we've discussed. Subsequent changes to the forecast of peak demand have both potential benefits and risks. The additional 2 years between when KEDNY asserted the project would be needed and when the project may not be needed, based on PA's assessments, provides KEDNY with an opportunity to augment its efforts on energy efficiency and other demand-side management programs to further delay or permanently avoid the potential need for the project. Okay, page 20. Page 20 considers the possibility that KEDNY might file a petition in the future to revisit this, but it says, if KEDNY files such a petition, the company must make a showing that it also made the appropriate efforts required under the rate order to implement its energy efficiency and other demand-side management programs prior to refiling. Okay? And page 27. Turn to page 27. The Commission expects that KEDNY will move forward at a rapid pace to fully develop its nascent weatherization programs and strengthen its demand-side management portfolio, as discussed in the Commission's recent order regarding KEDNY's incremental demand-side management programs. This order is like a Snickers bar, and sentences like that and instructions and guidance are like the nuts in the Snickers bar. You can't cut it up without finding those instructions. And that's what I'm supporting. I think that a yes vote is a clear denial of the petition with clear instructions and expectations about what KEDNY should do next. So that's, in reading this and reading some of the commentary and some of the background, that's how I decided to arrive at a yes vote. So that's how I'm going to be voting today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll do call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to deny the petition as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
No.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, everyone. We'll move to our third item for discussion, item 301, case 18-E-0130, related to the Joint Utilities request to modify the energy storage solicitations. It'll be presented today by Scott Nevins. Marco Padula and Stephanie McDermott are also available for questions. Thank you. Scott, when you're ready, please begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Christian and Commissioners. Item 301 is a draft order in case 18-E-0130 in the matter of Energy Storage Deployment Program, approving changes proposed in a petition filed on November 30th, 2022 by Central Hudson Gas and Electric Corporation, Consolidated Edison Company of New York, New York State Electric and Gas Corporation, Niagara Mohawk Power Corporation, doing business as National Grid, Orange and Rockland Utilities, and Rochester Gas and Electric Corporation, collectively the Joint Utilities, or JU, to modify future solicitations for energy storage dispatch rights contracts between an investor-owned utility and a storage developer by extending the in-service date to December 31st, 2028, and increasing the maximum number of years of the dispatch rights contract from 10 to 15. As you are aware, on December 13th, 2018, the Commission issued an order establishing energy storage goal and deployment policy in this proceeding. As part of that order, the JU were directed to competitively procure a total of 350 megawatts of bulk energy storage projects with dispatch rights contracts. 300 megawatts of which was to be located within the Con Edison service territory, and 10 megawatts in each of the other 5 investor-owned utilities. The 2018 energy storage order specified an in-service date of December 31st, 2022 for the energy storage systems and a 7-year maximum dispatch rights contract. After the first round of energy storage solicitations resulted in only National Grid reaching its target, the JU petitioned the Commission to extend the in-service date to December 31st, 2025, and to increase the maximum allowable dispatch rights contract to 10 years to try and increase the number of competitive bids and future solicitations. The Commission approved the JU's request on April 16, 2021. After a second round of solicitations, nearly half of the 350 megawatt goal is either under contract or in the final stages of contract negotiation. The draft order before the Commission today approves the JU's request to both extend the in-service date of contracted energy storage projects from December 31st, 2025 to December 31st, 2028, and to increase the maximum dispatch rights contract term from 10 to 15 years. Both changes are expected to make future utility solicitations more competitive to developers, resulting in more contracted megawatts. Lastly, only 3 parties submitted comments on the JU's petition, all of whom support the JU's request. This concludes my presentation, and we are happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Excellent for showing in front of the Commission. Thank you for your presentation. So, as I understand it, this is all part of our 6 gigawatt energy storage roadmap, at which point the Commission directed the joint utilities to pursue that 350 megawatt energy storage project goal through a competitive procurement process. You've just described the path we've taken to get to this point, various modifications to make the process more efficient, and this is yet another step in that direction to help us meet the remaining 50% of the target we have to achieve. So ultimately, I believe these modifications are going to enhance our efforts to procure battery storage and also lower the impact of ratepayers over time. So appreciate the effort and thank you for bringing this before us today. Commissioner Berman, do you have any comments?
Thank you. So I have a question. Energy storage and technical analysis that it has a 15-year life cycle. Has the analysis been done?
Well, the analysis comes from information that we get from developers and through NYSERDA.
Okay, but we haven't done it, or we don't have any technical experts that have done it to confirm that.
We do not know.
Okay, thanks. Question then, Microgrid Networks, which was one of the developers that submitted comments in support, and they have a project with an in-service deadline of 12/31/25. And they supported comments to extend the deadline. If we do that, do they get to change their contract to extend the deadline to 12/31/28?
Well, right now they're in final contract negotiations, so that date has not been set yet.
Okay, but could they, if they have it?
They could.
They submitted comments. We assume it's a 12/31/25 because that's what it would be. Can they extend the deadline?
If the Commission approves, yes, they could.
If the Commission approves. Anyone else who has a contract, we assume that it's a 12/31/25 deadline. At least that's up to it what it could be. Can they extend the deadline?
They would be eligible.
Can they extend the contract from the current years to further out, 7 years to 10 years?
10 to 15?
Yep.
Yeah, they would be able to.
Okay. So I'm a no. The reason I'm a no is when we first did the original order back in December 13, 2028, I concurred in part and dissented in part. My dissent was focused on concern about what we were doing for accountability and review, but I was for it. It's under the Public Service Law, Section 74. The Commission was required to establish, in consultation with NYSERDA, the ISO, and Long Island Power Authority, a statewide energy storage goal for 2030 and focus on a deployment policy to support that goal. Fine. Then we come back in April 16, 2021, with a petition that we approved to modify the original energy storage order. So an in-service date went from 12/31/22. We extended that to 12/31/25, correct? Okay. And we also looked at the contract terms. But that modification order, which I concurred on, and again raised concerns about what we were doing, we then focused on a triennial review, which would be coming again. My concern is, and the reason I supported concurring at the time, was it was on future solicitations. It was forward-looking. So clearly there weren't that many contracts anyway, but it wasn't that those who had already gone through the RFP bid and were winners were now allowed to take benefit for our change. I think that it is unfair for us to change contracts and RFPs that have been awarded for those folks, because we're going to do a future solicitation. We want to look at that. That's fine. But we are affecting things that have already gone through the RFP process. Now, folks have been talking about transparency in solicitations and RFP, and in here, New York Best also raised that and had some other ideas. All of that is forward-looking to when we're doing the triennial review, which is part of the roadmap that got issued in December 2022. It got SAP'd. Comments are flying in now. And in fact, I think the comment period will end before the April session. As far as I'm concerned, us approving today things that will affect current existing projects, while I understand those people who won those contracts would like to benefit, they shouldn't have a leg up from the change in us changing the deadlines that actually harm those folks who had already submitted through the RFP and lost. Future solicitations, perhaps not an issue. We should be looking at it more holistically when we look at the roadmap and the triennial review. And in fact, the modification order back in April 16, 2021, only dealt with future solicitations. It talked about changing the in-service date extension. It talked about the maximum contract duration for future solicitations. And in fact, the modification order then talked about the need to look at all of this as we head into the triennial review, and any further modifications should be part of the triennial review required by the original energy storage order and the modification order. And so we're changing the rules here, and I don't think that's fair, and I have grave concern because I think it delves into inserting ourselves in procurements that's already been dealt with. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm a no. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi?
I'll be supporting this. I have no further questions or comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. There must be a reason we're going a little slow, and that the utilities weren't anxious to sign the first set of contracts that may have come in. Could you sort of comment, were they too expensive? Were they technically unfeasible? Were they being reasonable? Or did they fear that they would overspend and we would find them imprudent on that? Can you just sort of characterize why it hasn't gone to schedule as originally hoped for?
Sure, I could do that. And first, I'll remind everyone that the RFPs that are carried out by the utilities for what we call storage dispatch contracts are just one tool in a toolbox to achieve the current storage goal. that the commission has
The
set
350 or the 6 gigs?
Well, the current goal is 3 gigs. The 6
okay.
gigawatt is a proposal that's
Right, okay.
currently in
But
the roadmap.
The 350 that we've actually are after.
Yep, the 350 is one piece of the 3,000 megawatts. And the way that the RFPs are handled is that the utilities put out a request for proposals. It's almost like a request for leasing a car, where they would lease the battery for a certain number of years. Then the utilities get to use that asset, use it in the market, sell it, sell ancillary services into the market, get that experience. And before they enter into those contracts, they go through an extremely detailed modeling of what they think they can achieve in terms of revenues from that asset. And they determine what's called a bid cap. And what we've seen, and staff is deeply involved in both the going through the modeling that each of the utilities do, review of the responses that come back. And what we've seen is in the past solicitations, those bids have not been below the expected bid cap. So it's almost like, why would you enter in to lease this asset if your expectation is to lose money? We don't want the utilities to do that. These are supposed to be revenue producing assets and leases that get entered into. So we also saw, as we've gone through and reviewed those results, that there are certain things, aspects of those procurements that resulted in the competitive proposals to be higher cost than normal, like the term that was set before of 7 years, like the in-service date, which more recently have become really difficult to make given all of the worldwide, we hate to use the word, supply constraints, right? Supply chain constraints, but they are real, especially when it comes to battery storage projects. So not just willy-nilly, let's not accept bids. There's deep analysis and modeling that goes into deciding not to accept the bid. And one point I just want to make is that regarding Commissioner Berman's comments is that what you're deciding here today doesn't automatically go into effect for those existing contracts. If an existing contract says that I need to push out the due date, that has to be negotiated with the utility. They can decide not to enter into that contract if in fact it's not economic to do so. So I hope that answers your question, Commissioner Howard.
Yeah, sort of. So the short answer is, from our observation, storage is costing more and taking longer, writ large.
Yes.
And is there any indication that that will change? And is there still risk is maybe the wrong phrase, still a possibility that given that ongoing supply chain issue and what we've seen in the real world marketplace, particularly for lithium ion technology, it has not decreased in cost as anticipated as this came to scale. In fact, it's been the other way around. It's actually cost more than anticipated, writ large.
Definitely more than we anticipated when we rolled out the first storage roadmap. Yep.
So our gross level of spending for the 3 and possibly 6 gigawatts of storage could, because when we're talking about 350, we're talking about an order of magnitude more in terms of size, spending, engineering, etc. That trend has no, we don't see it ending. I say, we're just going for a little bump. But, down the road, it's all going to come back together. It'll be cheaper and quicker and better. We have no indication that in fact, will occur?
I think if you look at some of the cost curves that show decreasing costs in the technology, they are pushed out further than where we were 3 years ago.
So our
for
wishful
example.
thinking just continues, only on a longer scale.
That's the reality of the situation.
No, I got it. I don't mean to be, make light of the situation. It's just, I guess this is how I view many of our CLCPA and decarbonization efforts. They'll take longer, and they'll cost a lot more. What is difficult for me is that we don't have that broad acknowledgement that at a broad policy level. Yes, our goals are real. Yes, our goals are necessary, but our estimates on cost and timing were maybe, since they were set arbitrarily, were maybe been a little more wishful thinking than hard reality of the ability of the marketplace and technology to achieve it. And I get where the utilities are in. If they were procuring everything else except under the mandate, they wouldn't do it at all because, like you said, they aren't in the business of losing money. And if the question is that if we do not see a time when they actually can make money, we'll have to view this as an ongoing subsidy over current pricing, whether it's a peaker unit or the like. But for public policy goals, we find it's worth the money. So at some point, I think that the entire reset comes, and as we do the analysis on the broader procurement, I think it's really important that we be as truthful as possible at the front end to say, guys, we tried hard, but stuff happened, the world changed, and maybe our belief that technology follows a curve, a decreasing curve, just was not ever going to be the case. So I think that's the real issue here before us. And the other thing is, our extending the useful life of these units by 5 years. We still know that they still, on an individual basis, may decline in output in those last few years of that 15. Is that possible?
That is possible, correct. Now, certain contract provisions would require cell replacements along the way to maintain the capability that's being purchased.
Right, but that maintaining that level of output and dispatchability doesn't come free.
Correct.
Okay. Well, anyway, I just think this is another one of our canaries in the coal mine. Shows that many of the things that we all agree on are very anxious to do, but at some point we have to say they're going to take a little longer, maybe a lot longer or longer, and cost maybe a little bit more, but could cost a lot more. And I think that we're going through this with this high degree of uncertainty on both performance and cost that we need to be very cognizant of, not only on this, but other technologies that are going to be deployed at scale in the near term. That being said, I will do a precursor before it ever comes to us. I am not in favor of putting automatic inflators in these technology purchases, saying, well, inflation might hit, so you can have an inflation factor there. Well, that's nobody goes to the grocery store and said, my groceries cost $100, but they have a chance to make it $108 because they had some stuff. That's not how I don't believe people really buy stuff. But it is not for this case, but I think it is going to be, from my point of view, something that I will look very closely at on issues going forward. But with that, I will be voting yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valesky?
No comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
I have no questions or comments. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. I'll do a call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to modify the energy storage solicitations as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I vote no.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We will now move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda today? I'll begin with Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. I just have a quick item 365. I want to give a shout out to MI. Kudos for them submitting comments on this. I think it made a difference, and I appreciate the fact that they did. Item 372, I am voting no, basically because in the order, it allows the commission to find that it is within the public interest, approving the request to incur indebtedness along with requested flexibility to modify without our prior approval the identity of the financing entities, payment terms, and amount financed up to the 300 million limit. I think this flexibility without coming back for commission approval is not good. And I have previously voted no whenever we allowed that flexibility. So I'm voting no. And item 661, I'll be voting for it. But I do just want to recognize that I think that the town of Oyster Bay should be working with Verizon. I think Verizon, there is some customer confusion. I think town of Oyster Bay's comments really spoke to me in some of that, and I think that we should try to address what I think is a clear issue there. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Alisi?
I will be supporting the entire agenda. No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
No questions, no comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard?
In keeping with my past votes, I'll be voting no on item 366.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
No comments.
Commissioner Majori?
Thank you. I'm going to be recusing from item 375, not recusing, I'm sorry, abstaining from item 375. Other than that, I'll vote yes on the rest of the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you. The items are approved. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Let me try that again. I'm getting ahead of myself. My vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I vote in favor except item 372. I'm a no. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard?
Yes, with the exception of item 366, where I'm in no.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes on all items.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes on all items except for 375, which I'm abstaining from voting on. Other than that, yes on everything else.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Okay. Madam Secretary, are there any other items to come before us today?
There's nothing further.
All right, and with that, I adjourn. Thank you, everyone.